to our next speaker. For anyone arriving late during the break, by the way, my name's Maddie Savage, and I'll be your host for the next couple of days. Now, our next speaker is going to be talking to us about the next generation of data infrastructure. So is there a way of businesses, scientists, politicians working together to create a more open and transparent digital ecosystem? Well, let's ask the expert. Visiting the Nordics from Italy, please welcome the CEO of Gaia-X, Francesco Bonfiglio.
Introducing our esteemed speaker.
Good afternoon. So, sorry for breaking your coffee break. My name is Francesco, and I'm Italian, and I am the CEO of Gaia-X. So I have two questions. How many of you speak Italian? Wow. How many of you know Gaia-X? Okay, not many. So I need to make some friends for tonight dinner, and I hope I will be successful. So, before I start, I was puzzled by the theme of today's event, which is the adaptable IT leader in advancing the automated organization. So I thought about, many of you are IT executives, CIOs and alike. And I was thinking, what do you think about being a new type of leader? Do we really need a new type of IT executive? So I asked myself about that, and I wanted to start with, I don't know if this is working. It's not working. Yeah. So, the new IT leader. Are you ready to be a new type of IT leader? So, why we need a new type of IT? Let's think about it. What is the new role of technology? And what is the new role of an IT leader? Well, I believe that technology as a new role, it has changed a lot. And if we think about it, it has moved from adapt to the business to changing the business. It has moved from automating existing business processes to replacing completely business processes. It has moved from being a business cost, we have heard Peter and Martin talking about that, into becoming an enabler for new business models. And it's moving from a nice-to-have into a must-have thing. As well, the new leader of IT, the new leader of technology, the new executive, must move from operations to strategy, must move from supporting the business into driving the business, must move from having cost-oriented MBOs into business-oriented, sales-oriented MBOs. In a nutshell, must move into yes, butter, because typically IT is always careful about the changes because they are cost and risk, into can-doer. Now, if this is true, do you believe you are impacted by this change? In other words, do you think there is any vertical that is more impacted than others? Well, agriculture, financial services, industry, whatever, it's all impacted. There is no difference because the digital economy is pervasive and it's based on data spaces. Data spaces are basically the digitalization of value chains in any ecosystem, being social, industrial, political, natural, economical. What we've heard before in the taxation system, the aspire of Peter was to build a common data space across all the services. The package service is an example of building services in a data space, so where you share all the data across the players that constitute a service, and this is the only way to build a digital ecosystem. So if this is true, and this is so impactful, do you feel in control of technology or you feel controlled, dependent on technology? This is the key question. And I think that this is the question we should ask today. And this very same question is the question that Europe has asked itself, and Gaia-X has been born for this specific question. Are we in control of the technology nowadays, or we are dependent on technology? So let's look into the European strategy. The European strategy for data is based on the development of data spaces. Like I said before, data spaces are these digital places where data across a value chain, can be a supply chain, can be a retail chain, can be a production chain. All data are collected in common places. But in order to collect the data, they have to follow the same rules of transfer, of control amongst the players that are exchanging the data. And these rules must be compliant and conformant to the basic principles that we have also in our European laws and regulations. So principle of trust, principle of transparency, principle of freedom of choice. Another objective, it's called the digital decade. So Europe by 2030 wants to achieve a computing continuum. Why is that? Everybody talks about 5G, 6G, 7G. Why is that? Because we need to create a continuum between where the data are created, which is everywhere, so the internet of everything, and the places where the data are elaborated. And data must flow around in the most seamless possible way. So interconnectivity is necessary, but not sufficient. And central cloud is a paradigm that does not work with this new world that is totally distributed. So we need to create a continuum between the edge, the far edge, the devices we have in our hands, and the central clouds that are still the main model of computing that we have today. So how does Gaia-X help in implementing this European data strategy? Well, first of all, Gaia-X is a totally private initiative, it's an association. It's an international association, non-for-profit, and it's been born by, let's say, an initial initiative which was a governmental project from Germany. Angela Merkel and the minister Peter Altmaier wanted to build a German cloud, a German sovereign cloud. Then France came in and said, we want to do the same. So Macron and Minister Bruno Le Maire said, we want to build a French sovereign cloud. And then all other countries said, we want to do the same. So let's make it an international non-for-profit association. We have 21 countries, 340 members from the consumer side of the technology and the producer side of the technology, all working together to build this new generation of trusted data platforms. Why what we do is so in line with the European data strategy? Because the European data strategy on one side wants to build these common European data spaces. Why are they so important? Without data spaces, you cannot build digital products on top of your physical products or services. On the other side, Europe wants to build possibly a common European cloud platform that is based on European technology, because we need to reduce dependence from non-European technology. Is this possible? Well, it's a good question. But today we need to ask the question, because there will be no tomorrow if we do not change something. And to do that, Europe is also starting some projects, the so-called IPSAI, Important Project for Common European Interest. This is a type of mechanism the European Commission has to build something that is missing, is a systemic gap that can only be filled by an IPSAI, so an important project. This important project aims to build this completely European cloud stack technology that starts from silicon up to SaaS. So it's pretty utopistic, you might believe, but it's happening. There is €7 billion investment behind it. So Gaia-X has nothing to do with the European Commission, has nothing to do with the governments, but we are developing, on one side, data spaces, European data spaces. We are promoting the development of European data spaces. And on the other side, we are developing a new generation of trusted data platforms. I will talk about what that means in a while. So why Gaia-X? And again, what are we talking about? Data economy. Do we really know what data economy is? Well, data economy is all about platform economy. Platform economy is about taking the data, injecting them into platforms that basically mesh them up, apply algorithms, and develop smart services. And the smart services are the services that make a non-digital ecosystem smart, so a digital ecosystem. So we can move from transportation to smart transportation, banking to smart banking, and on and on and on. But data platforms are based on cloud. Cloud per se is useless, does not produce an economy. But if we didn't have cloud, we wouldn't be talking about all these things. Anything we're talking about depends on the advent of the cloud. Now, what happens to the cloud? Net, this is the situation in Europe. Despite all the regulation, despite all these big plans from the European Commission to build a new European cloud, despite the GDPR, despite the Schrems II sentence from the Court of Justice that said that using American platforms is illegal, anyway, the market of cloud in Europe is tripled between 2017 and 2020. But the market share of European players is shrinking down and down. In 2025, it will be less than 10%, best case. And the market share of non-European player is growing. So now it's 70%. So we are very fragmented. We have a very low market share as European players. And we have a market that is growing. But the real problem is that industrial players are stuck because they have stopped adopting massively the cloud because it is a problem, or they are scared that adopting a cloud that is not compliant to the European regulation, is not adopting, interoperability mechanisms, but it's basically proprietary and black box is a problem. So we are not sharing our data across each other's to digitalize our value chains. We are keeping the data under the desk, and we're not doing it because we don't have trusted platform. But if we don't do it, we will not build digital products. We will not transform our services and products into digital services and products. So this is the deadlock, and we need to get out of this. The urgency is the following. So this is a picture of data in 2025. So what we're going to have in 2025? We're going to have a digital market that is shrinking in terms of European presence. We're going to have a big fragmentation because Europe is made largely by small, medium enterprise. And we have a growing value of the digital economy. So without creating federations of actors, we will not be competitive in the global market. Another phenomenon is about the economy. We will be largely dependent, we already are, by digital platforms. In the public sector, in the private sector, 70% minimum of the services will be dependent on digital platforms. But our data are still fragmented. So 70% of our data across a value chain are not joined together in common data spaces. So we need to work to create common data spaces to tackle that available market and be competitive. Last but not least, we cannot have political sovereignty without digital sovereignty. And there is no economy drive without digital sovereignty. And there is no sovereignty with private sovereignty, which is the one determined by private actors that are dominating the market, or autocratic sovereignty determined, for example, by governments. So we need trusted platforms. That's what we are doing. So Gaia-X wants to build an ecosystem of innovation that enable data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, which is actually technology autonomy, more than sovereignty, but everybody talks about digital sovereignty, so you understand what I mean. Reduces the dependency from non-sovereign, non-controllable platforms, and attracts and incentivizes our European industries to start creating data spaces and developing real data economy. Basically, we want to move from a model of concentrated, proprietary, opaque platforms, which have been designed to be like that, to increase the lock-in, everybody knows what that means, into distributed. Why? Because data are distributed, cannot be hyper-concentrated, no more. Open. Why? Because they need to be interoperable. You cannot have distributed data, distributed computing without interoperability. It doesn't work. And transparent. Why? Because you need to be in control. So basically, this is what we mean by trust and sovereignty. Being in control. We don't want to cut out at anyone from the European market, but we want the European market to set the rules of the game that nowadays are in the hands of a few players that have their own private rules. In other words, the problem is that the adoption is limited by the typical one-way approach, And we want to move from a one-way into roundabout approach where everybody can choose and move data and workloads everywhere. This is what everybody wants and needs, not just in Europe. And this is what we are trying to achieve with the Gaia-X. The X of the Gaia-X, Gaia is the goddess of fertility. So we want to create a great economy of data in Europe. And the X is this letter where you can visualize at the top side of the X, we have the data spaces. So we want to create this digitalization of ecosystem. The bottom side of the X is the infrastructure. So we want to federate infrastructures to host these data spaces. In between those yellow boxes are the so-called federation services. So one of the key deliverables of Gaia-X. These are software components that will enable to create the glue across the nodes and create this network, which is the basis of federated cloud, distributed federated cloud. So they provide for common identity, trust and controllability, common catalogs where to search and find services, and compliance to verify the compliance of the services being offered. Now, in a nutshell, we could spend days talking about the details. This is not what I'm going to do here. But we specify what I'm talking about. We develop it, and this is not usual. So it's an association that is developing software, yes, but not for commercial purposes, for free as an open source. And we qualify, so we define the so-called trust and labeling framework, which is the mechanism to verify the compliance of the services. All I'm talking about is going to be open source, distributed, decentralized, and based on the most modern technologies, verifiable credentials, distributed ledger technologies that will make this Gaia-X architecture self-certified. It's not run by the association, it's not run by anyone. It's like the internet. It's distributed and self-governed. So the roadmap, we do have a roadmap, of course. We have 5 years roadmap. Last year was the setup year. So we designed the architecture, we described all I'm talking about. We started developing the specification of the federation services, and we started the first data space projects. We call them lighthouse projects. We have one in the automotive that is collecting together BMW, Volkswagen, Daimler, Bosch, Siemens, and hundreds of players constituting the supply chain of the automotive. You all know the importance of the automotive sector in Europe, and this is the first time all these big players that are competitors in nature decided to get together, share the data, because together they can build better processes, better products, and have a better control of the supply chain, which was jeopardized, by the way, during the pandemic. We have the second year now, year 2, 2022, is the adoption year. What we mean by adoption is that we are starting developing these services I'm talking about, so the trust framework in order to achieve the compliance, and the federation services in order to build these federations and share data in a safe and secure way. We are already doing well. I will not go through the acronyms, but to make a long story short, you see that we have started already 4 of the 5 streams we wanted to do this year. So we developed our own software lab. We are starting the open source projects to develop all these components. They are running. We are developing the trust framework and the labeling framework. All these things are technologies, not just paperware. We want to move from paper to technology. And we started the first federation of cloud service provider, European cloud service provider. The project is called Structura-X. More than 30 cloud service providers are developing this federation. We are starting new data space projects in the healthcare, in agriculture, in education, supply chain, and many others. And we will see by the end of the year the deployment of these services in the market. So this is not research and development. These companies are spending their money to develop services for their business. This is the model we have. We have several committees that are working together to define the business side of Gaia-X, the technical side of Gaia-X, and the regulation side. They are converging requirements, developing this Gaia-X framework that is used by business projects to develop business services. So it's not a think tank that is doing theory. We want to achieve results in the market. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. This is a timeline. So by H1, by June, we're going to have the first components that are necessary to develop the trust So it's not something that we are just discussing about. And this is some of the projects that have already started. So I know I'm running out of time, but I wanted to give you, a sense of pragmatism of what we are doing. And I hope everybody understands the importance, or at least maybe you are curious and you can ask me questions later. Now, the last thing I wanted to say is about the community. We are now, this is an old slide, so we are more than 340 members, so a lot, 50-50 consumers and providers of technology in any sector. You can imagine the largest companies in Europe, as well as startups and small, medium enterprises. We have a good balance with SMEs. 70% of our members are small, medium business. And small, medium business in Italy and in Sweden or in Germany, it can be a large company compared to US. So we have everyone willing to work together to make this change happen. And we work on all different domains. We are working on 13 domains, 13 verticals. Manufacturing, retail, banking, agriculture, healthcare, like I said before. So working groups developing data spaces, working groups developing the infrastructure, all working together. We have 15 hubs, and the first was started out of Europe, which is Korea. The next one out of Europe will be Japan. Next week, we're going to inaugurate it. There's a lot of relationship between Europe and Japan, as you can imagine, in the industry sector. An interesting thing is that we are not only creating this movement, we have also a governmental advisory board that collects, as you see on the right side, many representatives from the governments. These are the cabinet of the ministries that are dealing with the digital transformation in our European countries. They sit together to strategize together about the digital transformation. This is the largest, I think, the most important example where politicians sit together to define a common strategy. All the projects related to the recovery funds and digital take into large account of Gaia-X, because no government in Europe is not taking Gaia-X as part of their strategy. So this is an example how Europe can work together for the common good, and this is happening also at political level, even though we are a totally private association, so we are just facilitating this type of discussions. There is a lot of events you can participate to understand more, so there's a website where you can find a lot of information, and I hope by now you understand, or you are curious about how to contribute, because you can shape the future, you can develop the Gaia-X together with us, and of course you can strengthen your relationship being part of the large community of members that we have. With that said, I'm done with my presentation. Thank you very much, and maybe we have still time for some Q&A.
Thanks very much. Really interesting to hear a bit more about how it all works and get some different perspectives. And we have had quite a few questions, so I will delve in. So this first question, what frictions have you seen and how are you handling those?
Well, there can be many frictions, as you can imagine, because we are talking about leveling the playing field. And everybody understands that there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of lobbying, and there is a big, huge interest that we are trying to kind of change. In other words, we have the GAFAM, everybody knows the acronym, but we have a very few handful of players that are dominating the digital and the technology market. And at the beginning, somebody believed we were trying to build a new European champion to compete with them, which is wrong. Then somebody believed we were trying to cut them out of Europe, which is wrong. Then somebody complained, why you are accepting members from US, why Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are part of your members, and instead of asking the other question. So if they are part of our projects, probably they understood we are defining new rules for the European playing field, and they want to play with the new rules instead of reinventing their own rules, because this has failed. So the frictions were political, were commercial, but to be honest, were more kind of perceptions. than real problems, because everybody's got different perceptions of what we should do. Somebody believes we should close the door around Europe and build our small castle to avoid anyone to work in Europe. This is wrong. We need to be competitive with the global market. And therefore, we had some frictions to convince everybody that our model was the right one.
As you grow, how will the decision-making and the power process shift, asks this next person. I guess if more and more companies and governments join, there's a question about decision-making and regulation.
Yeah. We have some very simple and strict rules. So the board of directors can only be constituted by a European headquartered company. So we are open to anybody, but we cannot be hijacked, if you want to use a bad word, by non-European companies that do not follow our European strategy. And on the other side, we have some very strict rules in the participation to the working groups. So no matter how big you are as a member, you can only participate with one person per working group. And this creates a very good balance, to be honest, because it gives everyone an opportunity. So we have small startups that are talking to large, huge giants, and everybody's bringing ideas. The association rules govern and keep control of any potential attempt to hijack or become hostage of anyone's trying to derail the initiative. This has not happened, and the model has proved to be the right one.
One final quick question. What about larger services such as office suites like Google Office Suite or Microsoft Teams? Will these be provided within GAIAX?
We're not developing software products. As I said before, we are developing this middle layer. It's a kind of an operating system or a platform as a service, if you want, that is intentionally meant to plug on top of existing IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. Now, to answer your question, we need to be aware that Europe has got plenty of solutions that are extremely competitive. The problem of this solution is that they cannot scale. That's why Federation provides support, because they could scale. They do not get the visibility, and GAIAX is providing visibility also through the Federation and through these new rules of trust that we are introducing. And they do not have, let me say, a compelling event. In other words, to be competitive, you have to have something new. GAIAX is doing something new. We are introducing the concept of distributed cloud, which is not in the market but necessary. We are introducing the concept of trust framework, which is needed but not in the market. And we are introducing the concept of technology trust. So it's a measurable, agnostic trust. Is not subjective, not given by certification of paper. It's the technology itself. So this is a compelling event that will make also European producers competitive in the market. And this will happen when we create federations of software as a service, for example.
Thanks for that clarification. Francesco Bonfiglio, you say you're sticking around to mingle. You wanted to make some friends here in the Nordics, so you can put your questions to Francesco later on in the day. But let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.